My husband and I own a martial arts school, and the building that it's in, which we also own, is about 130 years old next to a church. And I never believed in the paranormal, but the things that happened in it didn't just happen to me. It was decrepit, and we basically did all the work ourselves. It was old, creaky, and drafty. Steel knob and tube that we had to get an electrician to change out. So here's a bunch of things that happened. When we would be working with like drills and electric saws, I would hear the tinkling of a music box and I would stop everyone to ask if they hear it too. No one else did, so I assumed it must have been some music from the church coming through. My husband would often hear a woman's voice calling his name from the bottom of the stairs. It's 2 floors, a basement and a loft, and thinking it was me back from work, would always ask it to come up. Turns out the building was empty. Happened 4 or 5 times. One night, there's a small apartment on the second floor connected to a large hall. We woke up hearing what sounded like a broom sweeping across the wooden floors in the large hall. My husband got up to go check, but once he would walk in there, the sweeping sound would stop. It happened 3 more times that night. We chalked it up to mice or squirrels. We did find mummified squirrels in the attic once. We had a barbecue in the backyard and I needed to go get more utensils. There's a metal stairwell from the backyard up to the second floor, and then there's the main entrance staircase opposite to that. I came up the main entrance and heard footsteps pacing back and forth across the far end of hall and thought my husband came up from the metal stairwell to get utensils with me. It was dark and I couldn't see anything. I called out for him and the pacing stopped. No response, and then the pacing footsteps continued. Annoyed, I thought he was messing with me. So I flipped on the lights and all of the utensils from the shelf where I heard the pacing crashed down to the floor, like I spooked something. But there wasn't anything, not even a rat like I thought there might be. One Saturday morning, my husband was on his computer in another room. I am in the apartment playing with her app on my iPad when I heard the stereo sitting in front of me click on, and a girl's voice started talking from it. I thought he controlled the stereo from his computer, so I ignored it because he often puts on music to work out before class started. He teaches the morning class. I do remember thinking, what kind of weird ass indie music is he listening to anyway? Because the voice just said, "Hi, my name is." I thought I heard Katie, but I am not sure because I wasn't paying attention. I have never known a Katie in my life. I am dash years old. I am from dash dash dash. I didn't catch the specifics because I wasn't really listening, but that went on for about 2 to 3 minutes until it suddenly went, "Something's hurting me." And when I caught that, I looked up and squinted at the stereo like, what? Something's killing me. Something killed me. At this point, the hair is standing on the back of my neck and I am getting from the couch to take a closer look. Please someone tell my parents, tell the teachers, tell the corrections officer. At the word corrections officer, I just bolted into the other room and started yelling at my husband and cursing him out because I was certain he was playing a trick on me. Told him, we don't fucking play jokes about dead people, and he's of course looking at me like what the hell just happened to me. When he finally calms me down long enough to get what I heard out of me and what I was accusing him of, he told me it was impossible and led me to the stereo. It's not plugged in. I thought maybe the stereo picked up the signals from an ebook or something. So after that last fiasco, I went to ask our live-in student who lived with his GF in the basement apartment of the building if anything weird's happened. They shot each other an alarmed look and told me this. His girlfriend was sleeping one night when he was working overnight and she heard footsteps come down the stairs and their door open and then close. All of a sudden, a bright flashlight shines in her face and she can just make out the silhouette of a who she thought was her BF because he is tall and she can see the dirty jeans he is wearing. She is annoyed thinking he is messing with her, so she is swatting at him and telling him to stop. Finally, she gets so pissed off she rolls, turns on the lamp, and there's no one there. They sometimes hear footsteps on the first floor when there's no one in the building. They had a pet mouse at the time, and whenever that happened, it would start doing backflips in its tank. However, when class is going on and there are people in the building, the mouse didn't care and just went about its mousy business. They were play wrestling one day when suddenly their African grey parrot ruffles its feathers and in a really alarmed voice asked, "Who's there? Who's there?" They thought it was funny at first, so our student looked at the bird and pointed to the door and said, "You mean over here?" and ran towards the door to open it. As he did that, all the books that were lining the shelf on the way to the door fell over in front of him and the lights started flickering. The bird and the mouse both got spooked and were throwing themselves against their cages. Our second living student after the first, several times could just not find his phone when he woke up in the morning when he had placed it next to his bed the night before. He would search his room high and low and then he would find it perfectly placed right outside his locked bedroom door on the floor. I thought he might have been sleepwalking, but his GF says she would realize it if he did, since she's a very light sleeper. So don't know what's that about. Nothing notable has happened since then, but we have also not had anyone stay there overnight in years. It has taken me a long time to come to terms with what happened in my house in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I am finally ready to share. To give a little background, my family, mom, dad, older brother, and I moved to Tennessee in 1995 from Mexico. We moved to a very old ranch style home in Knox County and did not realize that this home would be the site of some of the most harrowing and terrifying experiences I have ever experienced. I am convinced that many occurrences have been suppressed in my mind, but I want to share with you the memories I do remember. My hand is shaking as I type this out, as these experiences haunt me to this day and are not easy to talk about. The activity in the house first began with the usual paranormal stuff you hear about: missing items, misplaced or moved belongings, strange creaks/noises around the house, nothing that can't be logically explained. It wasn't until we decided to add a room to the home about 4 to 5 months in that shit really began to hit the fan. I began to experience unusual things a few times a week to almost every single night thereafter. To give some perspective as to the layout of the home, upon entering, the living room is the first thing you see. To the left is a small hallway leading to my parents' bedroom. To the right of the living room is a very long and narrow hallway that leads to a guest room, then the room my brother and I shared for a short while. The hall ends with a bathroom and the entryway to the kitchen, an extra room directly across from my brother and I's room. Essentially, my room was on the complete opposite end of the house from my parents' room. Anyways, now that the picture is set, I will describe several of my experiences. While my brother slept in the room, I would experience nightly terrors in which I would see someone standing at my doorway. It would never move, but the only way to describe it was a tall, shadowy figure with a noticeably long white string like hair. It would watch me several times a week, and I would feel so terrified that all I would be able to do is cover my head with my blanket and pray it would go away. I told my parents what I had seen after the first night, but they madly chalked it up as me having had a nightmare. Typical. Eventually, it got to a point where I began to sleep on my side with a blanket over my head, with a small opening for me to look through. This continued for 2 years until my brother got his own room. That is when things really took a turn for the worst. I remember sleeping at night and seeing the same shadowy figure standing at my doorway. Feeling just as terrified as the previous time seeing it, I did the usual go to and covered my face with my blanket, hoping upon uncovering myself it would be gone. This time was very different. Upon uncovering my face, the same figure was standing in the room merely feet from my bed. I panicked and covered my head again, wondering if I was going mad. Upon uncovering my head once again, I saw that it had gone, and with a sigh of relief, I turned onto my back. This was not a good move. Upon turning onto my back, I saw the same figure was now floating over my bed on the ceiling. I was on the top bunk, so you can imagine how close it is now. The only way I can accurately describe this humanoid-like entity is that it looked like a mix of a grey alien and a very tall cryptic creeper from that one show. The second I saw it, I covered my face once again and felt absolutely petrified with fear. I then felt the figure lay on top of me as I lay frozen on my back. I remember hearing it breathing, sounding like a quiet, almost wheeze, and how cold its breath felt. I remember the distinct earthy smell emanating from its mouth as it breathed inches from my face, the only barrier being my blanket. It felt like hours passed, frozen in terror, feeling completely helpless. This occurrence was something that began to happen almost every night and only happened to me. Throughout my time living in that house, things progressively got worse. I would be lying in my bed reading a book with all the lights on when I would begin to hear scratching under my bed. I would pick under and be overcome with the same paralysis I would feel at night and the feeling of the figure lying on top of me. I would feel it pull me off my bed and onto the floor in the middle of my room and stare into my soul as I kept my eyes closed in sheer terror. My mom would later recount several times in which she would walk into my room and see me lying in the middle of the room on my back. She would ask me what I am doing, to which I would essentially snap out of it and tell her I was fine, too scared to talk about what had happened. I remember if I slept on my chest, I would feel like a force would pick me up by my shirt and drop me back onto my bed. This happened so often that to this day I am reluctant to sleep on my chest, not because I am afraid I'll be picked up, but because something in my subconscious mind tells me that it is not a good position to be in. My parents would tell me that I just had nightmares all the time, but they did not realize that these nightmares was something I experienced every night. Years later, having endured this every night, I began to see an additional apparition in the home. I began to see a young boy in the long stretch of narrow hallway that my bedroom was situated in. I would see him picking out of different rooms at me while I was in the hallway, only to disappear out of sight into the rooms, only to see he had disappeared upon my investigation. That would be the extent of my interaction with him, but I would see him often and only during the daytime. The apparition did not appear to be malicious, unlike the other figure that tormented me at night. He gave me the impression that he was merely an observer, which was comforting in a way, that this ghost did not want to mess with me, unlike that creeper entity. Over a decade later, now living in Atlanta, I decided to look up the address on Google Maps to show a friend and noticed that the home was now the site of a home business. Upon seeing that, I decided that I would reach out to them out of curiosity and see if they have had any similar experiences. The business would later reply saying that they had never had more electronic issues in the home than anywhere they had ever been, and that strange things occurred frequently. He told me that his wife and kids complained about seeing a little boy wandering around the hallway and were scared to live in the home. The man also described seeing a tall shadow occasionally when he was walking in his office, which actually turned out to be my old bedroom. He told me he always felt like he was being watched and felt generally uneasy in that room in particular. What is peculiar about this is that I had not described any of my experiences prior to him telling me his, yet our stories appear to line up. I showed my parents the message thread I had with this business, and it was then that they confirmed that they believed the house was haunted. They didn't want to say anything that would scare me even more and tried to bury it under the guise that I was having nightmares. My mother said that she would see the same little boy wandering around the kitchen and hallway, and she always felt that feeling of being watched when no one was home but her. Neither of them had seen the tall figure, and it seemed it was focused on me. The experiences I had in that home are permanently burned into my mind, and I will never forget that tall, wire haired figure that constantly picked me up, laid on me, and pulled me around, terrifying me to the core. I do not plan on ever returning to that home, and I pray no one who has the misfortune of living there experiences what I did on a nightly basis for 6 years. I have always been curious about deep hypnosis and what it may reveal to me, but I am equally terrified to remember events that my own mind deemed too traumatic to keep in my conscious mind. Hoth is a little village near Canterbury and Surrey, out on the old marshes that were once the Wonsum Channel. A few years ago in 2014, my landscaping company were called to a job in a beautiful house there. The house was a converted barn and had been bought by the new owners who wanted some work to be done there before moving in, as is often the case. So the first step was to visit the property and take a look to come up with a price for the job. There was a great deal of land surrounding the property with extensive gardens that had fallen into a state of disrepair. After visiting the property, I returned saying that the place gave me the creeps and that although it was empty and isolated, several hundred yards from the next dwelling, it felt like I was being watched. Obviously, everyone laughed at me. I priced the job, which was a big one, and would need us to be on site for about 5 days and forgot about the whole thing. As it turned out, we were given the contract for the garden clearance and various tree works, and we booked in for a few weeks' time. When we arrived on site, there was a crew of builders there already who were working inside the house and living there for a couple of weeks while they carried out the renovations. When we arrived, we said our hellos and John asked what they thought of the house. The reply was, "It's a lovely place, but it's haunted to hell." We laughed and asked why they thought that, and they told us that all night they could hear banging coming from empty rooms, their tools were being moved around, and they heard whispering. One had even received a phone call from a distant voice that couldn't be understood from the number 000000. He showed us the call record to prove it on his mobile phone. Interesting, but still not entirely convinced, we got on with our work. Joe told us that the back courtyard garden gave him the willies, but apart from that, day one was uneventful. On day two, it was quiet in the morning, then in the afternoon, I went inside for a coffee. While I was there was knocking sounds coming from one of the back rooms. Nobody was in there, but it could well have been someone in one of the garden areas knocking against the wood walls from outside while doing some job or another. But then there was a sound like wallpaper being unrolled or a poster falling off a wall, something like that. It came from the hall, then out of the hall, a shadow shot through the kitchen and out of the front door. I was alone in the house at the time, and after looking at every angle, the only way the shadow could have been cast was by the kitchen lights in the middle of the room. But there was nothing to cast it. I was starting to become a believer. On day 3, Paul, one of the builders, was having an argument with somebody on the phone. When he hung up, he said, "I can't believe that. The driver from the skip company says he won't come here to pick up the skip unless we can promise there's someone on site to meet him, because he reckons he saw something here when he dropped the skip off before we got, and it's definitely haunted." When he did arrive, he said that when he dropped the skip off the first time, he knew the place was empty, but he saw someone moving around in there, and while he was unloading the skip, the radio in his lorry came on loud with a load of static. Day 4 was quiet apart from the knocking and banging, which we had all gotten used to by then, even though it was louder than before and definitely not one of us messing about. On day 5, a guy turned up to put in a new TV aerial, and that involved some wiring being fitted in the back room where most of the noises came from. A few hours in, he was having a coffee with everyone else in the kitchen and said that he would be glad when he was done because that room was creeping him out. He said that he was sure he kept hearing someone walking around in there, but that there was nobody inside the house, let alone in that room. The final thing that happened while we were working there was that another contractor turned up to do some light fittings and parked outside the house. While he was in there, his van radio came on really loud with a lot of static, just like the skip driver had said happened when he was there before. A few weeks after we had been there, the new owners had moved in, and John and I went over to visit them and settle up the bill one evening after work. John was curious and asked the owner if he was enjoying living there. He obviously read between the lines a bit. Maybe he had already been asked about the place by one of the other contractors, and he responded by saying, "It's a beautiful house, but I must say it takes on a completely different feeling at night. It's not such a nice place after it gets dark." We returned to work there a couple more times on smaller jobs, but as the clients were living there full time by then, we didn't spend much time in the actual house itself. But on one occasion, we were in the kitchen in the evening having a cup of tea with the owner, when from the back room there was a huge crash, like a wardrobe being pushed over. The owner just put his fingers up and whispered, "Please just pretend you didn't hear that. We don't want the children to be scared." We do a lot of work on repossessed houses and houses going through probate, so visit a lot of empty properties often where the owner has recently died. And I have never in over 10 years been creeped out by a place like I was there. I am in sales, and Las Vegas is a part of my territory. Although I don't live there, I spend lots of time there for work and need to keep my hotel bill under a certain amount in order for my company to reimburse me. The Luxor is cheap, has a good valet parking, and is close to my work event. Plus, I never stayed there before, probably has some dated charm to it. I thought, fuck it, why not? When I walked into the lobby, I felt a mix of uneasy and curious. The Egyptian theme is so dated, yet the architecture was so ambitious for its time, it's hard not to appreciate it. I get to my room and I just start laughing. This is the worst hotel I have ever stayed in by far. It was built in 93, but for some reason feels much more dated than that. I always get a room with two queens everywhere I stay because hotels routinely skimp on blankets, so I take the blankets from one bed and bring them over to the other so I'm cozy. I do not bring over any pillows since I had enough and wouldn't be able to lay down straight with 6 huge pillows. Anyways, I wake up early, work out in my room, shower, housekeeping knocks on my door while I'm getting ready. I had to really yell for her to hear the room was still occupied. That's kind of annoying, so I put a do not disturb sign on my door handle, which stays on for the entirety of my stay. Right as I get ready, the fire alarm goes off. This is the first time this has happened at any hotel I have ever stayed at. While evacuating, security told me our elevator was shut off, but the opposite sides was still functional, meaning the alarm was triggered somewhere on my side of the resort. I had to take the fire escape down from the 12th floor. I googled Luxor fire alarm, and I guess this happens a couple of times every month. I wondered if this was the case with every hotel in Vegas, but chalked it up to it being so cheap, attracting a lot of riffraff. I come back to my room a few hours later to meditate plus clear my head for a work event. I beeline straight for the window and check out the view. Then I look at my bed. For some reason, the pillows from the guest bed were stacked up, parallel on top of each other, 3 high on my bed. Nothing was stolen, and I'm not sure if anything else was misplaced. I wouldn't have remembered the previous location of any other objects in my room, but I knew for a fact that I didn't do this. Kind of gave me creeps at first, but then I thought security probably was looking for the cause of the fire alarm and looked in my room even though I had a do not disturb sign. Then I thought, but why would something that triggers a fire alarm be under the pillows of the guest bed, and why would they stack them up so neatly on my bed? But I was there for an important work event and was trying to relax before, had better things to focus on. I dimmed the curtains, lay down, and took deep breaths. 20 minutes in, my manager calls me, says he needs me to cover a meeting for him. In a rush, I throw on my things and leave, not touching anything else in my room, plus leaving the curtains closed. I don't come back until after my work event. Got back to my room around 11. I open the door and my brain's alarm goes off. Something doesn't look right. The curtains were wide open. I knew I didn't leave them that way, and again, nothing was stolen. This freaked me out because I was trying to mentally justify this. I thought, I just turned up this AC this morning and the windows are diagonal. Maybe the draft opened them on their own, and I could also just have ADHD it, opening my windows on autopilot and forgetting that I did it. I had to gaslight myself to sleep that night. Told myself it was my ADHD and it was in fact me that opened the curtains. But when I thought of what the room looked like when I was leaving earlier, it was dim. That scared me. Had to switch my mental channel. I had to imagine myself opening the curtains and forgetting and pictured that so many times it seemed plausible. I didn't shower that night out of fear that if something was messing with me, it might take me being naked, wet, and vulnerable as an opportunity to escalate. I prayed hard while constant bumping and tapping occurred throughout the night. Chalked up the noises to loud, unruly neighbors, but the whole time I never saw anyone leave or enter any of the rooms around me. In the morning, I looked at the curtains, still closed. Wasn't a draft that opened them yesterday. I got on a call with my team, said I was excited to leave because weird shit keeps happening. They asked what I meant and I told them everything. One of my colleagues who was a Vegas local told me the Luxor is notorious for being haunted and cursed, and this is a well-known thing people have said about staying here. As I was leaving, I ran into a security guard outside the elevator and asked her if security goes into rooms even if they have the do not disturb sign on, if the fire alarm is going off, to see what the origins are. She basically said they can do that on paper, but she doesn't remember a time they have done that. I told her about the pillows, then about the curtains being open, and she wasn't giving me anything. So I straight up asked her if the place was haunted. She told me no and said that she's never heard that and no one's ever reported that to her. I thought, weird, maybe my coworker just knows a couple of people who are bullshitters. Maybe all this stuff was in my head. I asked the front desk about security going into rooms. She said no, never. I then asked about guests reporting objects moving in their rooms when they are gone. She again said no, never. Has never heard that, wasn't giving an inch. I then said, alright, be straight with me. Is this place haunted? Have any other guests ever reported unexplainable things happening in their room? She said, no, never. Haven't heard that from any guest. That's terrible. Somebody moved your stuff around. You should file a report. I smiled and said I was alright because nothing was stolen. I then googled, is the luxury hotel haunted? If nothing popped up, I would have dropped it. But boy, it was obvious that these point employees there are trained to gaslight. Ghosts are bad for business. Not only is this a common experience among guests at the luxury, but it's one of the most common experience among travelers. It's incredibly well known and documented to be a paranormal hotbed. I'm glad I didn't know this while I was staying there, or else I wouldn't be able to sleep. In the Google search results, the fourth result was a 3-star review about the 12th floor being haunted. I stayed on the 12th floor. Not only did I stay there, but my room was closest to the elevator, right in the middle of the 12th floor. The most 12th floor room on the 12th floor, if you will. I guess this place has been cursed from the very beginning, with lots of deaths in construction, allegedly mafia that's buried beneath the property, 4 suicides between its opening in 93 and now, a couple of murders, and an accidental deaths from safety hazards on some of the attraction. I heard the shape of the resort doesn't help, but I'm no expert. Never staying at that place ever again. Glad it's getting demolished in 2026. Good riddance. When my grandpa was a young man, he worked for the railroad. He made good money, and being he wasn't married yet, he had a nice car for that time, and on the weekends he liked to go out with his friends. He was headed back on a Friday and was running late to a dance that night, so he took a shortcut on a pretty curvy road. The sun was setting and he was headed west when he broke up over a hill. He was speeding and suddenly braking over the top of a hill. He became blinded by the sun, but in the last second could just make out that someone was standing in the road. He swerved to miss the person, went off the road down into a ravine, slammed into a tree. He must have passed out because the next thing he remembered was hearing the voice of a young man saying, Mister, are you alright? Grandpa said his head was splitting and his knee felt like it was on fire, but he was alive. The kid helped him out of the car and gathered up Grandpa's duffel bag and helped him up the bank and set him on the ground near the road. He could see an old house nearby, and Grandpa asked the kid if that was his house. The kid answered, yeah. It was then that Grandpa noticed that the boy had a hair lip and spoke with a strong lisp. He was a pudgy boy, pale and red-headed. He looked friendly enough, and when Grandpa asked him if he had a phone at his house, the boy shook his head and said no phone. Grandpa asked if his folks are at home, and he said no, and he said he didn't know when they would be back. Grandpa then asked how far the nearest neighbor was, and the boy said it was the last place he had passed with the long white fence in front. Grandpa thought back and figured it had to be around 6 miles or so. The boy said, you can come to my house. So the boy helped Grandpa limp up the long driveway up to the run-down old house. The house was cold even though it was a warm June evening, and Grandpa could see there was no central heating or even a wood stove, but there was a large fireplace and hearth in the kitchen. Grandpa asked if the house was always so cold, and the boy said, I'm always cold. Grandpa said, if you can go get some wood, I'll start a fire. The boy came back with a big arm load of wood, so Grandpa started a fire, and the wood was pretty dry, so in no time there was a big fire going, and the boy stood so close to it, rubbing his arms, soaking up the heat, that Grandpa said to him, you better be careful, buddy, you are going to get burned. The boy only replied, I am always cold. Grandpa asked the boy if he was hungry because he had some sandwiches in his bag, but the boy said he had already had his supper. Grandpa ate his sandwich while the boy still stood in front of the fire, too close for Grandpa's comfort, but he didn't say anything more. He looked around the house and it seemed like there hadn't been anyone there for a long time. It started getting dark and the boy turned from the fire and said, you can sleep in my bed, I'll keep the fire going. And Grandpa says, I don't want to put you out of your bed. And are you sure none of your neighbors won't be passing by? Maybe he could get some help with his car. The boy said, nobody ever comes up this far. They are scared of the ghosts. Grandpa said that shook him up a bit and said, what ghost? The boy replied, everyone says there's ghosts here, but I have never seen one. The only thing I'm scared of is nightmares. Grandpa said, you have nightmares? The boy said, yes. Every night, same dream. A giant hawk chases me and tries to eat me, but I wake up. Grandpa asked him, did you ever get chased by a pig in real life? And the boy said, yes. He had picked up a sow's baby by its leg and shook it so it was squealing, and the pig chased him and knocked him down, and he got bit up by the sow pretty bad. Grandpa said, well, that's probably why you have the nightmares. The boy just nodded his head. Grandpa said he was getting pretty tired and was hurting pretty badly and said thank you for letting him sleep on his bed, which was over in the corner of the room near the fireplace. The boy said he would keep the fire going and watch over while Grandpa slept. Grandpa said he woke up with a start from the dream he had. He had the same dream the boy told him about, a huge pig chasing him, and he woke up just as the pig was about to attack him. The boy was still sitting there in front of the fireplace. There were only coals left and the sun was coming up. Grandpa limped outside to take a pee off the porch, and he said he could hear a tractor in the distance. He limped over the field and waved his arms until the farmer saw him. He sat and waited because the farmer was a good distance away. He asked the farmer if he could pull his car out of the ravine, and the farmer said yes and asked if Grandpa was all right. He told him yes, and Grandpa rode on the wheel well out of the tractor till they got to the place where he went off the road. The farmer asked, kinda in shock, him, when did you run off the road? Grandpa said, last night, just before sunset. The farmer replied, where did you spend the night? Grandpa told him the story about the boy in the road and how he slept there last night. The farmer's face went white and he said, you slept there? And Grandpa said, yes, why? The farmer said, I had heard the place was haunted, but I never believed it. Grandpa said, well, the boy said, everyone said they thought ghosts live in that house. The farmer looked right at Grandpa and said, I guess they do. That boy was killed by the family's pig over a year ago. The farmer said the family all moved down south right after the funeral. They were so overcome with grief they couldn't stand living there in that house another day. It's been empty ever since.